I am a 24-year-old man named Alex, renting a small apartment downtown with my roommate Tyler. What started as a normal night of pizza and board games turned terrifying when he brought home a Ouija board. The moment the planchette moved on its own, the apartment stopped feeling like ours. I would have described myself as rational to the point of being boring. I rent a third-floor walk-up with my roommate Tyler in a narrow red brick building that used to be something else before it was chopped into apartments with thin walls and taller stories. The lease lists 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a galley kitchen that groans when the refrigerator motor kicks on, and a living room whose floor has a gentle tilt toward the front windows as if the building is tired of holding itself upright. The hall smells like warm dust and lemon cleaner. The old elevator sticks on 2 for exactly 3 seconds on its way up, and the mailbox row downstairs rattles on windy days like teeth. The landlord is a wiry man named Gerald, who drinks coffee as if it is the only way to anchor himself to earth. He gave us the tour with a practiced speech about quiet hours, laundry room etiquette, and how to jiggle the front door when it rains. He said nothing about history, he said nothing about ghosts. The first months were simple. I work mornings at a design firm that pretends to be larger than it is. I come home in the afternoon, run along the river path, shower, cook something that involves a pan and a plan, and then either read or join Tyler in the living room for a show, a game, or one of his light-hearted debates about whether the apartment plants are actually happier when we talk to them. Tyler is a year older, in a computer engineering program that eats his time and his sleep. He tends to oscillate between manic curiosity and bone-deep exhaustion. He likes haunted house movies, glitch videos of old analog television sets, and long podcasts where people tell stories about the uncanny with straight voices. When we signed the lease, I told myself his love of the paranormal was part of his private entertainment diet and nothing more. I have been wrong about things before. I did not expect to be wrong about the shape of the world that holds me. The night it began was a Friday that looked like any other from the hallway. The grocery store downstairs had just locked up, and the street was quiet except for the sound of someone shifting gears at the light. Tyler burst through the door, carrying a rectangular wooden box swaddled in a faded scarf the color of old tea. He said he had found something at a second-hand shop across town, and that it was perfect for a few friends who were coming by later. When he unwrapped the scarf, I felt my stomach react the way a person reacts when they see a shape in the road that might be a snake. It was a Ouija board, not the glossy cardboard novelty with a toy logo in the corner, but a heavy slab of wood with letters and numbers burned into it, and a sun and moon that looked hand-carved rather than stamped. The planchette was triangular and worn smooth by fingers that were not ours. He said the shop owner called the place Mystic Relics and claimed the board had come from an estate sale and might date to the 1930s. He said this with a grin that asked me to be delighted. I am not a superstitious person, or at least I was not before, and still I felt the hairs on my arms stand as if some part of me had more sense than the rest. 2 friends arrived a little after 9, Rachel with a sketchbook and the kind of curiosity that leans forward in chairs, and Marcus with a backpack that clinked the way a backpack clinks when someone brings bottles to a small gathering. They wanted a story to tell later. Tyler wanted a story to tell immediately. I wanted to avoid being the person who refuses to join the group and then sits in the kitchen listening to laughter from the next room. So we dimmed the lights until the room looked like the inside of a movie theater during previews, set the board on the coffee table that we had dragged to the center of the room, and lit 3 candles that smelled like vanilla and something sharper that I could not name. The apartment seemed to notice. The hum of the refrigerator felt louder. The wind against the window felt more deliberate. Someone outside coughed, and the sound carried through the glass like a warning. Tyler insisted we all rest 2 fingers on the planchette. He did not put on a showy voice or pretend to be a medium. He kept his usual energy and said that if there was any presence in the building, we would listen. I kept telling myself that muscle memory and tiny movements can move objects, that the mind is suggestible and wants to see shapes in static, that the human body can fool itself like a magician who hides a coin badly and still gets applause. The planchette twitched. I told myself Tyler had done it. The planchette slid toward a letter that meant nothing by itself. I told myself microtremors, subconscious pressure. A dozen articles I had read about ideomotor response. 100 demonstrations on videos, where debunkers showed exactly how a board can speak with fingers that do not know they are pushing. We watched it spell a simple greeting. Rachel whispered that she felt dizzy. Marcus muttered that someone was pushing. I stared at the grain of the wood to avoid the letters because part of me did not want to read. The board spelled a name. None of us had said it before that night. I am afraid even now of writing it often, as if repetition feeds something. We asked, not with dramatic flourishes, but with the flat questions of people who want badly to believe nothing is happening. Whether this presence lived here, whether we were intruding, whether it had wished to be left alone. The planchette moved in small, deliberate arcs. When the board spelled door, the hallway closet door eased open by itself an inch, and then another. I felt the weight of my body shift toward the exit without meaning to stand. Marcus got up and flicked the overhead light like someone opening a curtain too fast. The closet was empty. The air was not. When we ended the session and slid the planchette to the farewell word at the bottom of the board, we did everything people say to do. We said we were closing the connection. We said we were grateful for the conversation. We said goodnight to an empty room as if it were a guest. We wrapped the board back in the scarf and set it on the top shelf of the hallway closet and laughed a thin laugh that did not mean relief. I went to bed with my heart still loud enough that I could feel it in my throat. I told myself that fear is a habit like any other, and that if I broke the habit by refusing to feed it, I would be fine. The apartment did not agree. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to a faint scratching sound inside the wall near the radiator, as if a small animal was stuck behind the sheetrock and wanted out. I lay still and told myself old pipes make noises. Heat expands and contracts wood, buildings speak when they settle. A minute later, the sound came again from a different place, closer to the closet door. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly until dawn. Update 1. The next day carried that weird feeling apartments have after a party, even though we had not exactly had one. The candles were cold with little pools of wax that looked like eyes. The coffee table had a faint ring from a glass I did not remember anyone placing there, and the board waited behind the closet door with the patience of something that knows it will be touched again. Tyler was bright and joking in the morning, then by noon the jokes had a thin edge. He said his window had clicked in the middle of the night as if someone had tested the latch. Rachel sent a message saying she had dreamed of the hallway and woken with the taste of iron in her mouth. Marcus wrote a short note that read like someone convincing himself and us that the night had been a social experiment and nothing more. I went to work and tried to bury myself in tasks, but a line in a drawing would not stay straight, and the office clicked with a fluorescent hum that made my teeth feel on edge. When I got home, the hallway closet door stood open by itself. I told myself I must have left it cracked. I told myself air pressure does strange things in old buildings. I shut it gently and felt the weak latch find its spot. Tyler came in late and dropped his backpack with a sigh that sounded like surrender. We made food. We ate on the couch with the show playing too loud to hide the silence. At some point the coffee table was not where it had been. It had shifted a few inches left, not enough to be obvious, just enough that the corner now rubbed the edge of a rug and made a small sound each time we pushed our legs against it. Tyler said he had not moved it. I said I had not. I stood and pushed it back to the center with one hand and felt a ridiculous sense of victory, as if I had moved a chess piece into a winning square. A glass slid off the counter later without anyone touching it. It did not wobble first. It did not catch the light and warn us that it was going. It simply slid and fell, and shattered into tidy triangular fragments that looked more like a display than an accident. I stood with the dish towel in my hand and did not move for a long breath. Tyler said he must have left a film of water under it, and that the condensation let it skate. I cleaned in small, careful motions and placed the pieces into a paper bag because I did not want shards in the trash to rip the liner and leave bright slivers on the floor. That night the scratching in the wall returned, slightly louder than before, as if whatever had been crawling had learned the map. I listened to it trace a line from behind the radiator to the corner, where the baseboard pulls away from the plaster by the width of a thumbnail. I do not scare easily, or I did not before, but lying in that bed with my palms sweating and my eyes open and the air in the room feeling too thick for the size of the space, I knew we had brought something in that wanted the kind of attention you cannot give without paying for it later. The next morning I did what people who want control do. I made a list. Buy a better nightlight for the hall so the closet does not look like a mouth when I pass. Put felt pads under the coffee table feet to hear if it moves. Place a pencil on the lip of the radiator and mark its position so I know if vibration slides it. Store the board inside a box, inside a larger box, so that opening the closet does not feel like touching the thing. Call my mother and ask about the house we lived in when I was little, the one with the creaky attic and the rumor that someone had died there before we moved in. I did all of it except the last. I could not bring myself to say any of this out loud to anyone who might tell me to leave. I did not want to leave. I wanted the place I had chosen to remain the place I had chosen. The building had other ideas. On Sunday afternoon, I fell asleep on the couch with a book open, and woke to find the 3 candles we had used during the session, placed neatly in a row on the coffee table with their wicks pointing north. I had put them in a drawer after we cleaned up. The drawer was open an inch. The plan I had made felt like a child's picture of a dam in front of an ocean. I put the candles back and closed the drawer and sat for a while with my hands pressed between my knees the way I do when I need to convince my body to stay. When Tyler came out of his room in the evening, his color was wrong. He said he felt hot and cold at the same time, that his legs ached like he had run in his sleep for hours, that there was a pressure behind his eyes that made the ceiling look like it wanted to settle lower. I told him to drink water, eat bland food, and take a hot shower to see if it helped. He said the shower steamed but did not warm him. He said he felt someone behind the curtain and that when he pulled it back, no one was there. He laughed when he said it, the kind of laugh a person uses when he does not want to be alone with what he just noticed. At 3 in the morning, he called my name once, then again. I went to his room and found him sitting up in bed with his hands flat on the blanket like he was afraid the mattress would shift. He said someone had whispered his name in the far corner near the closet, and that he had tried to ignore it and then felt a cold breath on the side of his neck that made his jaw ache. He had a fever. I found the thermometer in the medicine basket we keep above the refrigerator and watched the numbers climb into the 100s. I made tea. I sat in the chair by his door until dawn. At some point, the radiator in the hallway clanged once, then again, and then sighed as if it had a chest. Update 2. Tyler did not go to class for 2 days. He slept in fits, woke with a start, said he had dreamed a man stood beside the bed with his head tilted in a way that hurt to watch, drank water, and fell back into a shallow doze. The circles under his eyes looked like bruises painted carefully to resemble fatigue. Rachel came over with soup and a hug that I think she meant for both of us. She said she had been sketching the living room from memory, because artists do that when they cannot get an image out of their heads. In the drawing, the hallway closet door was open wider than it had been that night, and a dark shape leaned from the shadow where the frame meets the wall. Not a person, exactly, but the outline of watching. Marcus sent a terse message about midterms that read like he was congratulating himself on not showing up for any of this. I went to the hardware store and bought a small toolbox that locks, put the board inside its scarf into the box, put the planchette into a separate Ziploc bag because something in me feared the two together more than apart, and tucked the toolbox into the far back of my closet behind a stack of coats. I told myself this was symbolic, and that symbols matter, and that if the mind is the place where fear grows, then the mind is also the place where you prune it. That night I slept a little better. Tyler did not. He woke with scratches on his left forearm that looked like 3 parallel lines a few inches long, not deep enough to bleed, but raised and angry as if a cat had tested the skin. We do not have a cat. His hair smelled faintly like candles that had burned out hours ago. In the morning, with coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through a memory, I opened my laptop and began to search the building by address, then by the name of the street before the city renamed it, then by a property record that listed prior owners with dates that reached back farther than our landlord. The building had been a single-family 3-story house when it was built just after the turn of the last century. In the 1920s, it became a boarding house for men who worked night shifts at the rail yard. In the early 1930s, a small notice appeared in a newspaper archive that said a tenant had been found dead in his room, that authorities ruled it a self-inflicted death, that neighbors whispered other explanations. The name was there. Seeing it printed in the rough typeset of an old paper made a cold pressure move behind my eyes, just like Tyler had described. Later, the building had changed hands, then fallen into neglect, then been used briefly as transitional housing for people with nowhere else to go, then boarded, then reopened, and carved into apartments with drywall that hides old doors, and a hallway that used to be a room. When I looked at the floor plan sketch in an old permit, I realized that our hallway closet used to be the entrance to a small internal staircase that no longer exists. The door opens into space that had once been movement and is now storage. I took pictures of the permit and the newspaper clipping and printed them because a screen felt too slippery for what I wanted to hold. I showed the pages to Tyler when he felt steady enough to sit. He read them slowly, nodded as if confirming a suspicion, and said in a voice that sounded younger than his face that the name in the article was the name the board had spelled. He asked if I believed the shape at the edge of our days was that man. I told him I did not know what to believe, and that the only useful belief right now was that we should behave as if the problem was both inside and outside, meaning that we should clean, fix, set boundaries like we would for any unwanted guest, and that we should ask for help when we needed it. I went downstairs to the laundry room to wash the blankets from Tyler's bed, because clean fabric gives the illusion of a reset. On the way back up, I noticed one of the brass numbers on our door had been turned upside down. It is screwed into wood. It does not turn without effort. I straightened it with my thumb and told myself it had loosened over time. That evening, the closet door stayed shut. That should have felt like victory. It felt like an eye closing to rest before it opens again. I sat at my desk and wrote everything that had happened in a long line without breaks so I could see the shape of the days all at once. I have a habit of indexing my life when it tilts. The list helps me step back from the feeling that time is a wave. The list ends here for now, at a point where my roommate is weaker than he should be. The air in the living room tastes faintly metallic the way it does in old houses where radiators cough. And a name from 89 years ago sits on my desk printed in thick black ink. Tomorrow I will try to find city records that map where the rooms used to be when the boarding house held men who slept in shifts. Tomorrow I will ask our landlord if he knows who lived in our line of units before the renovation. Tomorrow I will call my aunt who remembers strange things about old buildings better than anyone else in my family. Tonight I am closing the hallway nightlight so the shadows do not climb the wall like vines. Tonight I am going to say out loud, without raising my voice, that this space is mine and Tyler's, and that whatever learned our names is not invited. I do not know if that matters. I know it matters to me. I woke into a morning that felt borrowed, the kind you hold with two hands in case it slips. The hallway smelled faintly of old steam, as if the radiator had been dreaming. Tyler looked a little better on the surface, and worse beneath it, the way a lake looks calm while a current drags underneath. His fever had broken sometime before dawn, but he moved like a person who had learned the shape of gravity again and did not trust it. I made toast and eggs, carried the plate to his desk, and tried to sound like a man who only thinks in practical steps. We would open the windows for an hour to change the air. We would clean the baseboards and corners, because cleaning is a spell you'd do with your hands. We would take the toolbox with the board inside and move it to the storage locker in the basement, because distance helps even when you do not know why. He nodded slowly and swallowed as if each bite had to be convinced. The building had started to reveal itself once I began to ask the right questions. In the city archives, you can spend an afternoon inside a machine that turns silence into microfilm light, and if you are patient, the past climbs out of the black ribbon in narrow columns that smell of dust and ink. I found a notice I had missed the first time, a small follow-up that mentioned the inquest after the boarding house death. It named a landlord from that era, a man whose last name matched the one in our lease today if you took away the first letter and let time wear the rest. The archivist shrugged when I asked whether families keep buildings the way families keep grudges. Sometimes, he said, with a tone that made the word feel like weather. The article described a corridor that ran behind the rooms on the third floor, a service passage for coal scuttles and laundry carts, and a narrow door at the end that opened into a stair that led down to a side alley where deliveries came before dawn. The corridor matched the length of our hallway. The door matched the place of our closet. The staircase had been removed in a renovation and the doorway sealed from the other side. I traced the old plan with my finger and felt as if I had found a nerve under the skin of the building. Back home, the apartment had the quiet of a person trying to listen to its own heartbeat. I set a bowl of salt on the coffee table because my grandmother used to do that in houses that carried too much shouting, and she said salt is a stubborn listener that takes in what you cannot. Tyler stood in the bathroom running water over his wrists to cool himself and told me he could smell candle smoke again even though we had not lit anything since the first night. I pulled the storage locker key from the drawer, lifted the toolbox with both hands, and felt how the weight of an object changes when you assign it meaning. The basement hallway was cooler than the apartment, a long, concrete tube where old paint curls from cinder block in thin petals, and a single fluorescent bulb turns everything into an interrogation. Our locker sits at the end, a wire cage with a padlock we bought the first week so we could keep winter things out of the way. I set the toolbox on the shelf, closed the cage, clicked the lock, and said out loud without thinking that this is where you stay. On the way back, near the bottom of the stairs, I heard a faint tap followed by another, the sound a ring makes when it hits wood and then hits wood again. When I reached the top landing, I saw our apartment door slightly ajar with the brass number crooked again. I felt the impulse to shout down the stairwell to whoever had touched it, and then I remembered that sometimes the thing trying to hear you has no feet. Inside, Tyler sat at the table staring at his forearms. New fine scratches ran in short lines just above the wrist, faint, almost like the red impressions rubber bands leave when you have worn them too long. He looked up with a slow, deliberate turn of the head and asked if I had been the one who opened the door. I said no, and we both understood the conversation beneath that answer. I checked the lock bolt, which was still thrown, and the chain, which was still set, and stood there for a long moment, trying to account for how a door could be ajar and locked at once. Old doors settle. Old chains rattle. Old apartments teach you the shape of doubt and then ask you to live inside it. I do not know which version of the explanation I believed. I only know that the air had the taste it gets before lightning. Update 3. The storm started in the early evening as a low sheet of sound, like a crowd far away. The forecasters had been warning of a front moving in, but the line that came over us carried that odd green light storms sometimes bring when the sky forgets its color. Rain found every seam in the old brick and tried to right through it. The stairwell picked up the scent and carried it to our floor even though there is no window on 3. Just painted block and the vibration of pipes. I would have called it comforting once. That night, it felt like the building had drawn breath. Tyler went to bed early with a cup of ginger tea he did not drink. I set my phone face down on the coffee table so I would not chase every nervous impulse with light, and I sat in the chair by the hall because sitting in the place that scares you feels like taking back a tax the dark believes it owns. Around midnight, the sound changed. The rain slowed the way a heartbeat slows when you listen too hard, and the building let me hear what the weather had been hiding. Soft footfalls. Not boots, not bare feet, something in between, padded and careful, moved along the service corridor that no longer exists, the one that lives inside the wall across from our living room. They were not above us on 4 or below us on 2. They were at ear height. I stood and took 2 silent steps toward the closet, and the footfalls stopped. The radiator exhaled. The apartment held perfectly still, like a body trying not to cough. A voice spoke my name from the dark inside the closet. It was not a whisper. It was not a shout. It carried the even measured tone of someone telling a list to a clerk. The closet door did not move. The handle did not rattle. The voice came again, the same shape of sound, the same pacing, as if it were a message set to repeat. I have heard people describe terror as cold, and I have heard people describe it as heat. For me, it was a narrow band from the back of my neck to the base of my spine that turned to stone. I said his name back because the only thing I could think to do was return what was given and see if it took a different shape. The lights in the kitchen dimmed a fraction and returned. The hallway night light brightened and stayed too bright. For the half second a cheap sensor needs to decide a hand has passed in front of it. The voice stopped. In the bedroom, Tyler called for me with a sound that was half my name and half a wordless noise made by someone halfway out of sleep and halfway out of a dream. I went to his doorway and found him sitting upright with both hands gripping the blanket like a person bracing for impact on a plane. He said the word help in a quiet, almost conversational tone as if stating a preference in a restaurant, and I realized he was still asleep. I said his name twice, and he blinked as if surfacing from water and looked at me with a recognition that made my chest loosen. He said there was a man in the room standing by the closet turning his head to listen to something only he could hear. He said the man did not look at him and that somehow this was worse. He said the smell of rain had moved to the inside of his mouth. I told him to drink water and wipe his face with a cold cloth, and I stood there with my hand on the doorframe and understood that the building had heard me and wanted me to know it could say my name back. Sleep came in a series of brief, imperfect copies. When the sun finally found the edges of the blinds, the apartment looked exactly the same as the morning before, which is the strangest thing about nights that change you. The cupboard still held the bowls. The plant on the windowsill still pointed itself toward light, and the closet door still shut without protest when I pressed it with 2 fingers as if I had imagined its voice. I did what I always do when too much meaning accumulates. I tried to see if there was a way to add more information instead. Data is a kind of prayer for people like me, a way of asking for order with your eyes. If I could understand the lives that had run along this hallway when the building was a different shape, perhaps the pieces would settle. I called the Historical Society and asked if anyone had photographs of the interior from the boarding house period. A woman with a voice that sounded like she had lived a long time beneath ceiling fans told me that most records are lost when buildings change uses, but that sometimes insurance photos survive and that she would check. I searched property records again and found a list of prior owners that included a man with a last name 1 letter away from our landlord's. The date of the transfer would have made him a grandson. I thought about the way names carry through families even when houses do not, how reputations attach themselves to wood and brick whether or not anyone deserves them, and I wondered what a line of owners does to a place if each generation believes a story more than a floor plan. When I went downstairs to check the mailbox, I saw Gerald in the lobby pacing with his coffee and a set of keys that looked like they could open nerve endings. I asked him directly if he knew anything about the boarding house incident from the 1930s. He flinched, a small twitch of muscle at the corner of his jaw, and then he arranged his face into the professional neutrality landlords put on when tenants ask questions that do not involve rent. He said the building has had many lives and that old stories do not help new paint. I told him we had been hearing strange things. He said old pipes do that in spring. I asked whether anyone had ever reported a door that opened by itself. He said doors swell in humidity. I asked whether he had family who owned the place before a developer did the renovation. He stared at the keys like they were a sentence he could read, and then said that his grandfather had managed the property during a period when city records were a mess, and that he had heard about a tragedy, but that tragedies happen in every building that has been around long enough, and that the best thing to do is keep the place clean. He said the word clean with emphasis, as if it might be a prescription. I went back upstairs and scrubbed the kitchen floor with vinegar and hot water, because I will take any prescription that gives my hands something to do. The pencil I had balanced on the radiator lip had fallen to the floor. I picked it up and set it again and stood there looking down at a pencil like it was a compass. At noon, the Historical Society called back. The woman had found a photograph taken by an insurance adjuster after a small fire in the back hallway of the 3rd floor, sometime in the early 1930s. The photo showed a corridor lined with doors and a narrow closet at the end, with a paneled door that matched the profile still used in our apartment. The closet door in the picture stood half open and revealed the first 2 steps of a narrow stair turning down to the right. In the corner of the photograph, a man had been caught mid-turn looking over his shoulder toward the camera. His head tilt was slight, just enough to make you feel the angle in your own neck when you look too long. The caption said this image documents area near probable origin, no cause determined. I held my phone with both hands as if the picture might otherwise spill. When I showed Tyler, he put his fingertips on the screen the way a person touches a window to confirm glass exists. He said the man looked like someone trying to hear his name through a wall. Update 4. Late that afternoon, the building lost power for a little less than an hour. The storm had moved on, but the grid liked to sigh after weather. The emergency lights in the hallway cast the kind of glow you usually see in a cheap museum diorama of a mine disaster, and the elevator stopped exactly between 2 floors like a giant animal deciding whether to sleep. I used the outage as an excuse to go back down to the basement and double-check the storage cage. The flashlight on my phone cut a cone into the dim and picked out the small glitter that dust makes when it decides to look alive. The locker row looked like a series of rib cages. Our padlock was hanging from the hasp, but the shackle was not clicked. I had not left it that way. I am careful with locks. I am careful with everything since the night that voice used my name. I opened the cage slowly and aimed the light at the shelf where I had set the toolbox. The shelf was empty. For a second that did not have length, I could not feel my hands. Then the light found the toolbox on the floor just inside the cage, lid still closed, as if it had been set down rather than dropped. A part of me wanted to kneel and put my palm on the lid to feel if it was warm, to give myself a simple test I could fail or pass. Another part of me wanted to leave the room and climb the stairs 2 at a time and not look back until I could smell the hallway lemon cleaner again. I did neither. I stood absolutely still and waited for my breath to find me. After a count I decided was long enough to feel like a decision. I bent and lifted the box and set it back on the shelf and clicked the lock on the cage so hard the sound rang in the concrete. I told the room that this is mine, that the box stays shut, that the cage stays locked, that the stairs are for people with bodies, and then I backed away and did not turn my back on the row until I had to in order to find the stair. Upstairs I took the salt bowl from the coffee table and walked it to the hallway closet and set it on the floor inside the door. It felt absurd and necessary at the same time. My grandmother would have stood in the doorway and spoken to the air as if it were a neighbor who needed clear terms. I do not have her voice, but I tried to borrow her certainty. I said the space beyond this door is closed to you. The air in this hallway is ours. The names inside these rooms belong to us and not to your mouth. I said it in a tone I would use with a contractor who ignored a line on a drawing. The night came on soft and then dark, the way nights do when the grid has forgiven the city. I sat in the hall again, near the closet, with my back against the wall so I could feel the old plaster through my shirt like a slow heartbeat. Around 2 in the morning, a cold moved through the apartment that was not from outside air. It felt like the moment you step into a cathedral in winter, and the stone shows you the memory of last February. The nightlight at the baseboard near the closet brightened to full as if a hand had passed in front of it, and then dimmed and then brightened again in 3 steady pulses. Tyler made a thin sound from the bedroom, the kind a child makes when a nightmare lets go but leaves fingerprints. I stood and pressed my palm flat against the closet door and spoke the sentence I had practiced. Your body is gone. Your story is outside our door. You cannot have our names. You cannot have our air. You cannot have this hallway. I said it like a person signing for a package they will not accept. The nightlight went dark and stayed dark for 3 breaths and then returned to its low orange. The cold receded. Tyler stopped making the thin sound and rolled over once and then settled. I held the doorknob and felt a long, low vibration in the metal, like someone humming far away. I do not know if the sentence did anything. I only know that saying it changed me into someone who could stand in a doorway and refuse. Morning came with a kind of fragile clarity buildings sometimes give people as an apology. The air looked washed. The kitchen light made a small click and cooperated without complaint. Tyler ate without being asked and did not look over his shoulder while he chewed. I checked the basement locker again after breakfast. The lock was still clicked. The box was still on the shelf. The dust near the door showed a faint line where something flat had been dragged across it in a slow arc that curved toward our cage and stopped at the toe of my shoe print from the night before. I used my phone to take a picture, and then I stood there and stared at my own shoe print inside that curve, and I understood that the building was teaching me its alphabet 1 letter at a time. I needed more letters. I needed stories that lived in people instead of paper. I knocked on Mrs. Alvarez's door on 2 because she has lived in the building longer than any name on the mailboxes, and she knows which pipes complain and which complain for a reason. She looked at my face for 3 seconds and then opened the door the rest of the way and told me to sit. She made coffee that tasted like courage and told me that when the developers cut this place into apartments, they found a small room behind a wall on 3 with nothing in it but an iron hook and a circle of scorched wood. She said a worker got a headache that would not go away and quit the job the same day. She said the foreman told them to seal the room, and that the inspector signed off on the new wall because the drawing said storage, and sometimes drawings tell the truth the way a photograph does not. When I asked where the room had been, she walked me up the stairs and put her hand on the plaster across from our closet and tapped the wall with her knuckle, and it sounded a little different from the rest. She smiled a tired smile and said to keep it clean and to talk when the air feels crowded. She said a name I recognized in a tone that was not unkind, and then she said that people leave each other by degrees, and sometimes it takes more than one goodbye. I stood in the hall after she went back inside and listened to the space across from me like it might tell me whether it wanted to remain a wall. The day outside was clear and ordinary and full of people who will never know how many doors in their own buildings used to be other shapes. I wrote everything down in the long line again so I would not forget any detail, and I set my jaw around a plan without a diagram. I would pull every thread the building handed me. I would search the records until the names all sat on my desk in a row. I would take Tyler to a doctor if his fever rose again, because not all troubles begin in walls. I would ask Gerald in plain daylight if his grandfather ever kept a ledger of who lived here when the hallway carried more breath. And I would bring salt to every doorway and sentences to every room, because the only way I know how to be alive is to stand where I am and insist that the place where I am standing becomes mine again. The third week arrived like a bruise you stop checking, darker at the edges but almost familiar. Tyler was steady again, though steady meant he looked out the window longer than before and asked questions with his shoulders instead of his mouth. The salt bowl in the closet had caked into a hard rim, the way ocean air cakes car doors, and I replaced it with fresh granules poured in a small spiral, as if shape could matter. I kept the old hardened bowl as evidence, a fossil of what silence can eat. The building seemed quieter in the mornings, but alive in the hours after midnight. That is when the radiators hissed without steam, when the pipes throbbed once like a hidden fist, when shadows in the hallway looked thicker than the walls that framed them. I would have thought my mind had started to invent patterns to fill the fear, if not for the messages that kept slipping into the cracks of daily life. A key left on the counter would be found at the base of the closet door. A phone charger cord coiled itself into a loop that looked too much like the sketch of an ear. The pencil on the radiator lip fell again, and this time landed point down, stuck upright in the small seam of wood. A voice that was not mine called my name in the shower, faint enough that I could pretend it was the pipes, but exact enough to use the rhythm my mother does when she wants my attention. When you collect enough fragments, you stop asking whether they are random. You begin to accept that the building is trying to learn the sound of you, the way you are trying to learn the sound of it. Update 5. The day before the fifth incident, I took the subway across town to the archives again. This time I asked for ledgers, not newspapers. Old boarding houses sometimes kept registers of tenants, and insurance companies demanded lists of occupants in case of fire. After an hour of squinting at faded ink, I found a page dated 1933 that listed 8 names with corresponding room numbers. The last entry was the name William Larkin, marked with the note "Deceased in Residence, see Coroner File." His room number matched the space across from our apartment, where the wall sounds hollow. I copied the entry, my pen pressing harder than the paper deserved, and rode the train home with the name in my pocket like a coal ember. That night the wall gave up its secret. Around 2 a.m. I woke to Tyler sitting on the floor of the hallway, back against the plaster opposite the closet, his face blank in the light of his phone. He said he heard a whisper in the wall, not a word but a low, drawn breath. I sat beside him and put my ear to the paint, and at first heard nothing but the distant groan of the building. Then, faint but deliberate, came 3 syllables shaped like a name. It was not mine. It was William. The plaster carried it as if the wall had memorized it. I pressed harder, and the surface felt almost warm, the way a handrail feels after someone else has just used it. Tyler recoiled and said the air tasted of iron. We both stood and stepped back, and the night light near the baseboard flickered until it went out. We stayed awake until dawn, whispering about whether to leave the apartment for good. But leaving would mean surrendering, and surrendering felt like leaving the building with its voice unchallenged. In the morning, I called Mrs. Alvarez again and told her the name I had found. She sighed as if she had been waiting for me to say it. She told me her uncle once worked in the renovation crew and found an old journal half burnt in the sealed room. She never saw it herself, but he told her it mentioned debts, unpaid rent, and a landlord who wrote notes about correcting troublesome tenants. She said her uncle returned the journal to the wall after one night because he woke to someone standing at the foot of his bed with his own handwriting on their chest. She said the wall does not like when its stories are disturbed without respect. I walked back upstairs and placed a fresh bowl of salt against the plaster, then spoke aloud. "William, I know your name. You were here. You are still here. But this is our apartment now, and we will not let your landlord's silence keep you." The air eased, only slightly, but enough to feel as if the wall had exhaled. Update 6. The final incident came 3 nights later. Tyler had gone to bed early, and I sat in the hall again, a ritual now, a man keeping watch over plaster like a priest over relics. At midnight, the closet door creaked once, a hinge noise, and then went still. The wall opposite throbbed faintly, the way speakers vibrate when bass passes through. Then came a sound that shook me to my center, a long, dragging scrape of wood across wood, like a chair moved slowly in a room too small to hold it. The sound moved downward, as if descending stairs that no longer exist. I stood frozen until it ended with a dull thud far below. When the silence settled, the wall felt different. No heat, no vibration, only a dense stillness. The salt bowl cracked neatly down the center as if struck from within. Tyler emerged from the bedroom and said he dreamed of a man setting down a suitcase, tipping his hat, and stepping through a door. The man looked back once, nodded, and walked out into the rain. We replaced the salt again, and for the first time, it stayed loose, uncrusted. The lights stayed steady that night. No whispers came. In the days that followed, the apartment felt lighter, the way lungs feel when a cough finally leaves. Gerald, the landlord, stopped pacing in the lobby. Mrs. Alvarez brought us tamales and said softly that not every tenant leaves when the lease ends, but sometimes even old tenants learn how to rest. I kept the copied ledger page in my desk drawer and the photograph from the Historical Society on the wall above it. The name William Larkin no longer felt like a weight. It felt like a record finally read aloud. Tyler and I spoke less of the board, less of the toolbox in the basement. It remained locked, untouched, as if ignoring it was part of the truce. We planted basil in the kitchen window, watered it daily, and sometimes at night I caught the faintest smell of rain but without fear. It felt instead like memory, the way old houses remind you they once heard storms, long before you arrived. One evening I stood in the hall alone and said a single sentence, "This is our home." The plaster did not answer, and for the first time silence felt like peace.